Hey guys, and welcome back to the Woven Energy Podcast on Real Practical Shamanism with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. We're here once again to talk about shamanism from the ground up. This is episode 34 now, and we are going to talk about the spirit dance. So we're going to explore various places around the world that we can use as examples, and we can see it in action, so we can get a bit of a flavor for it. We have introduced the spirit dance as stage 3 of learning shamanism a few times in previous episodes, specifically in episode 32, where we laid the foundation. And so in this episode, we just want to explore where it's from. But first of all, we have a few patrons to thank. So, Damon, do you want to read out our list of people who we're extremely grateful to?
I will indeed, mate. So, yeah, amazing. Our patrons get thanked twice. They get thanked once on Heretics and once on Woven Energy. So we actually, since we did the last episode of Woven Energy, we've actually had 10 new patrons since then. It's just absolutely amazing. I'm thrilled to bits over it. So huge thanks to Bartek Bielecki, Ben Palmer, Brett Galloway, Daniel Ristow, Ilko Weisma, Jonathan Young, Julie Cottle, Mario Alfano, Martin Guidem, and Nathan. We've got 19 patrons now altogether. Actually, Patreon, it shows up as 18, but we haven't found a patron who's supporting us offline. A
heretic.
A heretic indeed, yeah. And that's probably 19, well, probably 18 or 17 more than I thought we were going to get. So it's absolutely amazing. And we had targets. First 2 targets we met and exceeded. We thought $100 a month was going to be ambitious, and that's been exceeded. So we're now on just number of patrons targets. And I think what we've always wanted to do with this is sort of spread the notion that there's the need in the world for an archaic revival. And the more people we have involved, the better. And our patrons are heavily involved now. There's some great discussions going on Patreon about the kind of stuff that we've been talking about, and indeed in the Grove. And so,
do you want to introduce the Grove? Because there's actually a forum there now as well, isn't there?
Yeah. So the forum at the moment is the Grove, as we know. I think we said before, is an antidote. Or is that we're developing it to compensate for the fact that we're an audio kind of a podcast. We're an audio-only format thing. And with stage 1 and stage 2, we could kind of get away with verbal descriptions of some of the techniques. We sort of realized, didn't we, that for level 3, for the spirit dance, it just wasn't going to hack it, that just audio descriptions.
Because in my experience, as well as the way it's gone on this podcast, is stage 3 is so complex that we have actually tried to start talking about stage 3 on the podcast,
and it's tough.
And you and me were not so happy with it. And to be honest, I got quite a few emails afterwards, basically in a very polite way, saying, "Huh?
Can I have a video?"
And I think we made the decision to start it again. But the Grove would be a good place to be. So how do people get into the Grove?
Well, the Grove is a software platform that we're developing. A lot of the funds that we've got, a large proportion of the funds that we've got from our patrons are being ploughed into the Grove's development. So at the moment, the part of the Grove that's up and running is a discussion group. But there's also a discussion group, Patreon, the comments on the posts. Every episode, I make a bunch of Damon's reflection kind of notes for each episode inside Patreon. And so there are discussions going on as comments against those episode notes. And they're about episodes that we've already released. What's going on in the Grove at the moment is rather different. That's more planning for future episodes. That's what we're using for at the moment. Obviously, once the Grove is fully up and running, those discussions will also include discussions about actual training, about the actual shamanic techniques that we're practicing in the Grove. But at the moment, we're just using it for the founder. At the moment, it's the founder patrons and the power patrons, and the three of us who are using it as a sort of planning tool to test out the software, because it's very, very new software. So we don't want too many people on it. But the discussions that are going on in Patreon are very good and very interesting. And those discussions are available to everybody from a $5 a month patron upwards. So that's the idea behind the Grove. Effectively, it will be an online training school for shamanism. That's what we're building it up towards.
Yeah, split across an online membership platform, which includes a forum as well as Patreon.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So that's the plan going forward. It is prudent to point out as well that these episodes, we don't have a filter on these episodes at all, do we? These are just us having a conversation as if you and me were down the pub or down in a coffee shop. There's no real filter on, if you're not supporting us on Patreon, you're not getting the good stuff or anything.
Absolutely.
It does give people the opportunity to interact with us and ask questions and
as I said, I mean,
give feedback and all that.
Our patrons are very active. A lot of them are very active in what we're doing. And so I view it as almost, I've said it's almost like our tribe, our own tribe. And I do hope that as we develop as a group, all of us, as we develop as a group in the future, we may be able to have some sort of small influence on the world. And bring it back a sort of rather less superficial archaic revival that went on during the 90s, the one that went on during the 90s, because this planet needs it, frankly. Things are not heading in a good direction in terms of, the harm that we're doing to the planet. And it would be nice as if a group we can play our small part in doing something about that. It would be great in the future.
We should go the whole hog and just call it a cult, Damon. I remember when I first started doing this stuff, all my friends thought I was in a cult.
Have you heard the latest episode of Heretics yet, Joe?
No, I haven't.
We did talk about the definition of a cult on that.
All right, fair enough.
As a religion that I don't agree with.
Cool. Okay, so Spirit Dance. This is part one of a few episodes that we're going to be doing on the Spirit Dance, I imagine, because it's a huge topic, and it's would it be correct to say that a hell of a lot of shamanic technique out there is actually Spirit Dance, even if people have different words for it or see it as different things, it's still at the core of it, it's Spirit Dance. So
exactly, and it survives in the modern world in lots of different forms. The original kind of shamanic Spirit Dance, the heavy-duty hunter-gatherer type of Spirit Dance, in its sort of raw form, is very rare in the world. You would see stuff like that in places like Mongolia, for instance. But actually, paralleling this development of civilization and the move of shamanism into esotericism within settled societies, and then further, shamanism and esotericism trying to embed themselves inside exoteric religions in order to survive, have given spin-offs in a lot of different ways. And so you get a very large number of dancers that are sort of what I would describe as semi-shamanic. I mean, we've mentioned the whirling dervishes before, haven't we?
Yes.
And so when you take those spirit dancers into account, the number of spirit dance types and flavors of spirit dance in the world is absolutely huge. It's colossal.
And there's varying degrees over time of how ritualized it's become as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the whirling dervishes are from Sufism, and in Sufi alone, you've got various different quote-unquote dancers.
I mean, it actually goes back to the 13th century, which is very interesting to me. I mean, Sufi master Rumi, who you've mentioned before on the podcast, was sort of the originator of that. And the whirling dervishes associated with the Sufi tradition, obviously. But the timing was very interesting to me, because that was around the time, or just after the time, of the great Mongol expansion. The Mongols pushing out all over the world, including into that area of the world, carrying their sort of shamanic tradition with them. And it's Sufism, for people who don't know, is the sort of biggest esoteric leaning branch of Islam. It's not the biggest branch of Islam, not even close, but it's the biggest sort of esoteric leaning branch of Islam. And there's a ritual in Sufism called the Sema ritual, which effectively involves spirit dance.
Well, let's get some spellings on these, because obviously this episode, hopefully we can find some of these examples on YouTube.
Yeah,
or on the internet.
That's going to take a long time. I refer people to the Patreon episode notes. Okay. Because, a lot of these things, and when we get into Mongol stuff, the spellings are my own. And typing them into Google isn't going to help you very much. So what I will do is I'll do a big reference on all the words and spellings on Patreon, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So it's not fully shamanic spirit dance. There's a lot of exotericism has permeated into it. There's a lot of set patterns in it. But generally involves a kind of rotation, a kind of smooth rotation. And, that you might see, if you want to just look up whirling dervishes on YouTube, you'll find them. Yeah. And what I mean by there's a lot of set pattern in it is it's been taken from esotericism, from shamanism, and it's influenced an exoteric religion of Islam. And you get a sort of melding or combination of both, and this happens a lot of places all over the world. And the dress, the garb, though, just with shamanism, the garb adds a sort of aesthetic effect to it, and also more than aesthetic effect, it adds to the character of it. And they have these sort of big, long robes that sort of bow outwards as they're whirling. Yeah. Actually, when they're just getting started, they sort of come onto the stage or come into the area where they're going to do it. That can be quite, very, very like a softened form of the San people's camel dance that we've mentioned before. It's a bit train-like as they come in, but much more serene, because these exoteric religions, they tend to be more austere. They tend to be more reserved in their character than, for instance, proper hunter-gatherer, tribal, shamanic dance. It tends to be incredibly lively, yeah. And this is more serene, it's more meditative, but you can still see that it's done in a state of chillicity, or some people do it in a state of chillicity. And it's actually taught as a state of chillicity with a minus or plus, depending on your point of view, and that is they don't think about things. That would be what a shaman would do. A shaman would do their spirit dance, a hunter-gatherer shaman would do their spirit dance in a raw state of chillicity and think of nothing whatsoever. The whirling dervishes, they think of nothing except Allah, God. And so there is a thinking thing, there's a baseline going on in there, but it's like a mild version of shamanism. It's esotericism. There's a definition of esotericism. Esotericism is a mild, sort of softened down version of shamanism. And they actually say the name Allah as they whirl around. And so, actually,
can I just interrupt? Sorry, Dan.
Sure,
if you
sure.
type in Sufi ritual dance into YouTube, there's all sorts that crops up. There are, obviously the whirling dervishes come up because that's the most famous. There's also one called Dhikr, like Dhikr.
Yeah.
And that's a few of them stuck out to me, because when I researched this a few years ago, a lot of the knowledge has kind of disappeared from my head now, but from what I can remember, there was the whirling dervishes, which are very cyclical. It's very smooth, like you were talking about. And then there's other rituals like this zikr or dhikr that are very rhythmic, very almost jump and rhythm.
That's right, yeah.
And they put themselves in a trance through rhythm. Tyrak, yeah. But it seems to me still very relevant to shamanic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Technique.
It's all the same kind of thing. Yeah, but
is there a spectrum? Is there a spectrum? Because this is. Is there a spectrum?
There is a spectrum. There's a spectrum to the people who are practicing it in terms of how esoteric or exoteric they are. But remember, this is esotericism. This is not shamanism. They are embedded within a heavily exoteric culture, and they have been subject to persecution on the basis of that. So they have to be careful. For instance, the epicenter of the world today of what we call the Whirling Dervishes, which is the Sufi Mevlevi order, who was the order of Sufism that came up with this originally, that did this, was actually banned in Turkey in 1925, even though Turkey is like the heartland of this type of dance. And technically speaking, that order is still illegal today. It was banned under the famous secularist leader, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who is sort of the founder of modern Turkey. He's of the Republican People's Party. And technically speaking, in Turkey today, this is still illegal, this order. And so...
Funny that, isn't it?
Absolutely, but it's a great example of how esotericism gets frowned on by the majority, in an exoteric society. Actually, the rite to perform the Sema ritual, which is the most famous one of these various esoteric dances, was re-established in 1954. That was a guy under a prime minister called Adnan Menderes, who was the very first prime minister of the Democrat Party in Turkey. But the rite is only there to perform it as a sort of form of, entertainment for tourists or demonstration or something like that. Technically speaking, in its heartland in Turkey today, this is still illegal, this order, Sufi Mevlevi order. So you can see that I was going to say, here's something interesting. On YouTube, if you type in ZIKR Firebird Sufi Ritual of Divine Ecstasy, this is an example of, in my opinion, Damon, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong, of the kind of thing that once you get into shamanism, even if you have no knowledge of what the hell you're doing, you start experimenting with these techniques. This is the kind of thing that just starts spontaneously happening to you and coming out of you. Exactly.
Yes, it's these simplistic, quote unquote, simplistic style, rhythmic, constant movements.
Yes. But what you do see, which you wouldn't see in hunter-gatherer shamanism, is they're all doing, you see it done in groups, and they're all doing roughly the same thing. That is the restrictions of their exotericism restraining their movement. It's their culture. There are certain things that it's culturally okay to do, and there's certain things it's culturally not okay to do. And the point I'm trying to make is that in true shamanic dance, none of those restrictions are there. Shamans, for instance, you take a Mongolian shaman, in doing their spirit dance, they do whatever they please, or they do whatever. It's not what they please. It comes to them.
I wish we still had that video, because you've linked to a Mongolian shaman.
It was great, wasn't it?
I thought
amazing,
it was fantastic, but it had gone. Somebody had taken the video down. Someone had obviously uploaded it, and then the guy just got, take that down now. A bit like you would have done in the old days.
I can do that. So in the Grove, there's going to be video of me doing what that guy was doing. Yeah, so don't worry about it. Yeah, once we get the bleeding thing up and running. Yeah.
Are you going to dress up like him though, Damon?
Wouldn't that be great? That's a question I have. That might be a question for our patrons. What do you think I should wear in the Grove? I sort of thought something, very hippie kind of. Joe knows how I dress normally. I definitely don't look like a shaman. Jogging pants and a t-shirt.
Comforts all the way.
But that's got nothing to do with shamanism. How you dress really. Sometimes the dress. The shaman's costume can add to the techniques, for instance, the use of a veil, or the use of various things that sort of make unusual patterns of sensation on your body as you're doing a spirit dance, and various other techniques. But actually, jogging pants and a t-shirt are just fine. So I guess that's a question for our patrons. What should Damon wear in the Grove?
Yeah,
okay.
because we don't want to be associated with the old hippy-dippy kind of navel-gazing crowd, do we?
Yeah, no, but I quite like some of that sort of hippie clothing. It's quite cool, you know. So just on that basis,
I've seen your drum.
Oh yeah, my drum's quite nice, isn't it? Yeah.
Mine's just a plain old boring thing.
Yeah, sorry, mine's got some gorgeous,
nice
amazing original artwork on it. Yeah. Anyway, but you know, I told you my original drum was a biscuit tin. Yeah, haven't I?
Oh yeah. Episode 6, I think that was episode 6. Yeah, because that was the longest episode we ever recorded. I think.
Is that right?
About all your experiences.
Right,
it was knocked on an hour and a half. I think you were talking about a lot of your experiences. That's a really interesting episode, guys. If you want to go check that out, episode 6. If you're new to the podcast, really good episode.
There was actually a huge amount of stuff we didn't cover in that episode. I thought maybe we could do at a later date, maybe do a revisiting. All the things that I forgot to mention in that episode would probably fill up another episode. So,
well, I've listened to it recently, and basically, there's so much stuff you're talking about. Every time I question you, you're just like, "Yep, that's for another episode. That's for another episode." So we'll have to listen to it again and make a list.
Yeah, cool.
I was obsessed with Sufism a few years ago. I really liked some of these
a lot
rituals.
about
it. I wouldn't say I know a lot about it. I don't tend to dig deep into the customs. I just end up looking at the way they move, and because it reminded me as well. Because when I went to the Hindu temple, there's a Bengali ritual that we do every year.
Yeah.
And it's called the Durga Puja, and it is crackers, Damon. There's the gongs going, there's the drums going. It's absolute cacophony. There's the horn, and everyone's sort of jumping up and down in the middle of this area, and then there's the incense going, and there's the priest doing all this, and it's obviously ritualized to a certain degree, but it's got that. It's, I like to think of it in these terms. There's all these traditions around the world, and some of them you only need to scratch the surface to be able to see that shamanic underpinning to it, and others you have to, get a shovel and really dig deep to find it. But most of the time, it's there. Yeah.
So if you look at, for instance, the Sufi ritual that we're talking about, the Sema ritual, there are esoteric and exoteric explanations of things. There's an asymmetry in that dance. So the right hand is generally held, for those guys, they generally hold it palm up, and the left hand is held palm down. It's like the Ten Chi thing out of the Chinese arts, heaven and earth, or Japanese arts. And and that shamans the world over do that. That asymmetry adds richness, adds flavor, adds character. But they come up with an exoteric explanation of it, which is what comes from Allah, i.e. the palm that's turned upwards, should be shared with the people, i.e. the palm that's turned downwards, and so, like you say, that's a bit of an exoteric veneer just sort of spread on the top to make it more socially acceptable on the top of it's kind of thinly veiled spirit dance. Yeah, that's the an example, exactly what you're talking about. Incidentally, I thoroughly enjoyed your wedding, mate. For those that don't know, Joe had a Hindu wedding. He actually had a combination wedding, wasn't it? It was Hindu and humanist.
It was a. Well, I realised it was a humanist afterwards. There was a bunch of stuff up. Yeah, that was.
I was sat
that was
there
an interesting day. I
was sat there thinking, why couldn't my wedding be as good as this?
Yeah, it was a good day.
It was. But
you
cool.
You begin to see various things in those rituals. Even in wedding rituals, there's a certain undertone to it in a Hindu wedding, and that's not just. I mean, mine was a Bengali Hindu wedding. There's different all around the world. There's different types of Hindu weddings from wherever you are in India. I mean, India is a fascinating country. It's hard to even think of it as a country.
I just really like
a collection of countries.
I really like the fact that the guy conducting the ceremony was explaining everything to everybody. It's just like I thought. It's almost like I had a Roman Catholic wedding. It's almost like nothing gets explained. You're not really qualified to know why they do the various things. You just have to sort of accept it. And quite interesting. So, so there's one example of spirit dance. But it's like we've got this whole world to choose from, and so where do you go next, really? So what I thought I'd do was I'd just talk about a few that I'm sort of more familiar with. As people have probably gathered.
I'll just ask you a really quick basic question before you continue. Sorry. Is Morris dance anything to do with spirit dance?
The way I do it, yeah. The problem is there's so little original Morris dance left in the world.
It's the most amusing thing I've ever seen.
It was radically reinvented by the Victorians. That's the issue with Morris dance. And I think that it certainly does come from an originally shamanic place. But there's so little original left in the world. Like I said, the vast majority of Morris dance was invented by the Victorians.
We've never talked about this, but it would be fascinating if you have any knowledge on it what actually happened in the UK, because as far as I can see, it's a long, long since departed. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything shamanic that originated from the UK. I mean, maybe there is.
You know exactly what happened in the UK. It's called Christianity happened. That's what happened.
Oh, that old thing.
Yeah. So, briefly, we had a fairly shamanic heritage. You had the Celts, and also the Angles, the Jutes and Saxons. They were all shamanic originally, but then
we still have the stone circles, don't we, dotted around, and I think obvious relics from the animistic days, at least.
There's 3 stone circles, 10 minutes walk from my house. That's one of the reasons why I picked this house. They are amazing, those places. I'll go up there and do my spirit dance around the stones. Oh gosh, on a misty morning on Bodmin Moor, it's just, cannot tell you what this ancient land is like here. Just phenomenal, and so basically Christianity happened to us. Interestingly, on the Heretics podcast, the last 2 episodes have been on Mithraism, which was a Roman branch of esotericism, a Roman secret society that sort of embedded a lot of its teachings within Christianity. And so we got in Britain, we got a lot of those early shamanic, esoteric understandings. That wisdom was embedded within Christianity here as well. And that's why you get the Arthurian legends and things like that. It's all that stuff. But we should do a podcast on that, mate, because we're supposed to be doing a podcast on spirit dance, and we're going to get anything done if we start going into that stuff. But, I think we've mentioned before, for instance, in the legend, the Grail, the Grail in the Arthurian legends, that's the chalice, that's chalicity, and the Grail was something that was achieved. So we'll come back to the Arthurian legends, either on Woven Edge or on Heretics at some point, for sure. So where to start? Where's a good place to start? Well, this week I was sort of thinking, what's the most well-known form of spirit dance in the world, on the planet? And I think I've come up with a definitive answer on that. And I think it's the haka that the New Zealand rugby team
the New Zealand guys, yeah.
Yeah, the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team, do this dance, spirit dance, the haka. And it's, I think some of the very traditional Maori people in New Zealand are not too happy about that. They see it as a sort of misappropriation or misuse of the dance. But it is very impressive.
Yeah. It's from the Aboriginals, right?
No, it's from the Maori people, yeah.
The Maori, sorry. Okay,
the Maori people, yeah.
Yep, got you.
I don't like that word Aboriginals. I think it's a bit of a derogatory term. You could say that when Captain Cook arrived in New Zealand, was it 1769 or something? It was him and his crew who were the Aboriginals compared to the,
fair enough,
they're sort of rather brutish culture compared to this incredibly sophisticated, smoking, wonderful Maori civilization,
Yeah, so if you just type haka into YouTube, it's quite a lot of just rugby stuff, isn't
and
it?
if you just watch the New Zealand the All Blacks. It's the rugby union team, I think, doing it. I mean, it's all become ritualised. That, like I say, the Maori, when Captain Cook arrived, they were more of a civilization. They weren't really there was nothing ancient hunter-gathering going on there, but they had preserved a lot of stuff, and the haka there were a wide range of uses for the haka. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just this. And what the rugby team do, sort of a version of it that's akin to the version of spirit dance that the Maori warriors would use in preparation for battle. Of course, those very battles themselves were part of sort of their modern civilization that they developed. The hunter-gatherers wouldn't be having very many battles back in the day, But there are lots of other uses of that dance or variations on it. Another thing that's really interesting is it was done by both men and women in Maori culture. It seems to be that the fact that it's only done by men, that seems to have come from rugby culture rather than Maori culture, which I find quite funny, But it was used at funerals. It was used to welcome guests.
Is that true? Is haka only quote unquote obviously supposed to be done by men?
No, it's as a matter of fact only done by men on the All Black team because there are no women on the All Black team. Yeah.
Okay. So
right. Women did the haka. Yeah, they still do. And so what I was doing there was I was contrasting shamanistic cultures and shamanistic leaning cultures, which tend to involve women much more in the religious and spiritual life of the group, to male-centric cultures of command and control cultures, like British culture, that tend to make distinctions between what men can do and what women can do. That's the issue. And of course, I'm not saying that the Maoris were true sort of hunter-gatherer society. They weren't when Captain Cook arrived. They were but they were a very sophisticated civilization. They certainly were not, ancient in that sense. For instance, they developed agriculture. Even before the Europeans arrived, they developed agriculture to quite a sophisticated level. I don't know if you call it full-blown agriculture, but it was certainly extremely sophisticated gardening. And they grew food. They grew, sweet potatoes and taro and gourds and yams and all these kind of foods. They were producing those in bulk. So they weren't totally reliant on hunting. They also had this sort of thing that a lot of coastal cultures have, where they have such ready access to nature's bounty from the sea that they don't really have to work very hard, frankly, in terms of food, But there's also a competition for haka and haka-type stuff called Te Matatini, which happens once every 2 years, which is sort of akin to the Mongolian Nadam. And actually, it wasn't the All Blacks actually the first rugby team to start doing the haka. It wasn't the All Blacks, actually. It was the New Zealand native football team. And this goes all the way back to 1888. And then the All Blacks started doing it in 1905. So it has a long history in rugby. And what I was going to say is, although it's super dumbed down, and it's really, really ritualized compared to, what I would call proper spirit dance, you can still see the power of it. You can still feel the power of it as they do it. And, different teams have done it better and worse over the years. But some of those guys, it makes you tingle, when you see them doing it. And it's probably quite intimidating for the other teams. It's a massive understatement, right?
I'm just watching a bit now.
Intimidating to the point of cheating, I would say.
Yeah.
And I sort of thought,
when it's used in a rugby environment, it's just used to get them completely in the zone, right? It's not really meant for anything other than that, I would imagine.
Yeah,
it's just it's just get your energy levels up, get ready, get in the zone.
And absolutely. And it comes it grew out of, it's a modernized form of it, isn't it? But it grew out of the Maori, the activity of the Maori shamans. The Maori shamans are called tohunga. And there are various different types of tohunga. Is more like a person of power, a person with a power or ability. And so different types of these shamans. For instance, the Tohunga and Matakite, these are the Maori shamans who would predict the future. The very traditional kind of shamans, if you want to call it traditionally. They have a close to nature, and they, give the tribe a sort of strategic level of advice, or the people. They weren't a tribe, the Maoris, as I said, they were civilization. They give the people a bunch of strategic advice based upon their closeness to nature. And then you also had like the Tohunga Kokorangi, people into astronomy and all this kind of stuff. And there's loads and loads of different types. And they had these things they call karakia, which effectively are their shamanic techniques. So in a way, the haka was one of many different shamanic techniques like that, and I just thought that's a really, really good example of something that, when I often mention spirit dance to people, are like, what's that? But everybody's seen it, Most people have seen the New Zealand rugby team do the haka. Yes, so that was kind of my first example from the world of the wonderful world of spirit dance.
Well, we've got to remember that the term spirit dance in the context that we're using it is an all-encompassing term.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
There's spectrums to all these things, especially when you start diving deep into this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And even within the same group, within the same bunch of people, coming back to the Welling Dervishes, even with the same bunch of people doing it in the same place at the same time, you see different levels of esotericism varying from one person to another. And my experience of those esoteric groups is that 90% of them are doing it in a very exoteric way. And then the other 10% are sort of the black sheeps of the family. They get sort of tolerated or frowned upon, and they're doing it in a spectrum towards from esotericism all the way towards heavy-duty shamanism, and they tend to keep quiet about it. Because
Isn't
the rest
it
of the group
interesting
frown
that
on
the
them.
more towards the real shamanic end of it gets, the more you get chastised by your group or your society.
Absolutely. And because you are becoming a threat, aren't you? You're becoming a threat to the established social order. If people can get wisdom, understanding, and truth, if you want truth, from nature directly, why do they need an established church? Why do they need an established social order? They don't need that. They don't need to go to the priest to get that understanding. They can get it themselves. And therefore, when you view exoteric religion as a tool that society use in order to maintain their control over the society, you're sort of threatening that. If you're a heavy-duty shamanist within one of those societies, you're a threat, and they probably want to tie you to a post and burn you. As happened a lot,
which is what they
Europe.
did.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is where secret societies emerge from, the fact that, if you're at that esoteric end of the spectrum and people are frowning on your activity, you sort of learn very quickly to keep your mouth shut. I've been through that myself. The way the tone of my voice there probably gave away that I've been through that particular pain in my own life more than once. You learn to keep your mouth shut. It's quite interesting, and so that's an example, a couple of examples of well-known ones. So now let's pick a completely at random, though we have mentioned the Ainu people before. We mentioned them quite at length in the Heretics podcast episode on Aikido. The founder of Aikido was interacted with the Ainu, not in a good way. That's my short summary of that episode, that rather unpopular episode.
You weren't expecting anything different for that episode, though, were you?
Certainly wasn't. I was a heretic. So
I remember I listened to one episode. I was just got about 10 minutes in. I don't know whether it was the Aikido one. It might have been, but you basically just said, "Yeah, Confucianism is the cancer of China, Chinese civilization." I was like, "Okay, that's gonna, that's done it. That's gonna rankle a few people."
Yeah, it's all a matter of opinion, isn't it? And who cares, So let's take the Ainu people. Now they do lots of different shamanic dances, until until the Japanese people decided to get rid of them or get rid of Ainu culture. And this is in the 20th century, late 19th and 20th century. They decided to get rid of Ainu culture. Before that,
can we just clarify? The Ainu are the indigenous people of Japan.
The indigenous inhabitants of Japan, yes. So the people who were in Japan before the Japanese arrived, yeah. And they are a heavily shamanistic people even today. The problem that they've got is not so much that they're not very shamanistic. So this is very different, for instance, the whirling dervishes, and very different from the New Zealand rugby team doing the haka. These people's shamanism was fairly pure originally. The problem is that the Japanese government took the decision to eradicate it, and a bunch of laws passed to stamp it out, basically. And so there's not very much left. What's left is very shamanistic, but there's not much left. But one of the things that has sort of survived is the Ainu crane dance. So this is a type of animal spirit dance, and it is based on the mating dance of cranes, and the traditional robes that are worn by the Ainu when they do this dance, they're amazing. These robes, they sort of use this dark blue and white combination that looks really, really cool, and they use these maze-like geometric patterns on the garments just look amazing. And they use sort of a part of the garments like a cloth that goes over the head, and then that simulates the wings of the crane
see it now.
that are flapping. Yeah. And what's really, really interesting in that dance is that it is proper animal spirit dance. You know, the wing, I don't know how to describe it really, except that the wings work. When they flap the wings, it's almost like the air that's being pulled down by the wings is lifting the dancer off the ground. I mean, they don't literally come off the ground, but the dance definitely gives that kind of an impression where it's like the flapping of the wings is literally, you know, lightening the performer to the point where they're sort of bouncing upwards up from the earth. And also in that dance you get, I think I can hear the
crow sounds.
Hear the sound of the cranes in the background. Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah.
Oh, it's disappeared now. Yeah, they were making the crane sounds as well. There we
go. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very shamanistic. It's as we said, there's spirit dance, and then there's animal spirit dance, which is like a higher order of spirit dance, one of the higher orders of spirit dance, and it's wonderful. The Ainu crane. I've had a good go at that myself. I mean, no, but I've never had anybody who's an Ainu teach it to me, but I've definitely had a good go at imitating that or doing that kind of a flavour in the dance. And obviously, for my martial arts training, I have a bit of flavour of the crane anyway. And so yes. I quite enjoy that. What
was interesting about that one that I was just seeing is there was a very rhythmic clap as they were moving. Is that a form of the ritualization of it?
Yeah, lightweight, but it's not too bad in that case. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. That's just like the rhythm of the drum, isn't it? You know, There's nothing wrong with that. It is, like I say, I attribute that not so much to. Attribute it not so much to the fact that their culture has dumbed it down. I attribute it more to the decimation that's been imposed upon their culture by the Japanese. There's so few people actually do it anymore that the standards probably aren't. You know, if you went back, you'd find people who are a lot better at it because there was more people doing it. Do you follow what I mean? And it was more embedded within their culture. And it wasn't frowned upon. But it is one that I find very quite sort of somewhat
It's very
authentic.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And also you get harmony between the performers. So you get this a lot of shamanic spirit dances. When there's more than one person doing this spirit dance, the motions that are made by the performance often affect or influence the motions of the other performers. So, for instance, within Japanese culture, we've had this thing, kagura, which we've mentioned a few times. And there are many different types of kagura, but it's like a masked shamanic spirit dance where they wear masks. And in probably the tradition from Japan that I'm most familiar with, of the tradition in Nakayama Miki, the particular type of kagura in that, each of the performers, there are 8 it's performed around what's known as a kanro-dai. Kanro is like the jikimotsu, it's like the wisdom that the shaman derives from nature. And the kanro-dai is like this stand-up pillar that represents the spiritual nature. Geometrically, it represents the spiritual nature of human beings. And then around this pillar, the dancers stand wearing these different masks, and each of the masks represents effectively one of the 8 trigrams. And the character of the dance of each performer is in character with the particular trigram, the change within nature, the energetic change within nature that the trigram represents. And what you get, because those trigrams have relationships to each other, so you have the ahara yi in Chinese, or the futatsu totsu in Japanese. So for instance, the trigram jag, which is all the yangs, has a ahara yi relationship with the trigram meld, which is all the yins. It has that kind of 2-in-1 relationship. And those 2 dancers, because they have that very strong relationship with each other, you would find that those 2 dancers in the kagura are not doing the same movements as each other, but the movements that they are doing are harmonizing with each other. The movement that one is doing is kind of harmonizing with the movement that the other one is doing, even though they're different movements. And the dancers in that kagura, they also use sort of ribbons attached to other performers of the dance that represent some of these linkages between the 8 trigrams. Incidentally, there's another very controversial thing that I've said on the Woven Energy podcast. I should have said that one on heretics, but never mind.
I think we'll forgive you, Damon.
And then off to the side, you have 2 other performers who represent Izanagi and Izanami, who I think we've described before, the 2 creative principles that in tradition gave rise to Japan, the sort of yin and yang, if you like. And they stand off to the side of necessity. Ideally they would be in the center, but the center is where this pillar is. And the pillar, in allegory, it represents the metaphorical point on the ground called the jiba, where the universe, Japan, is supported of being created from. But I think, as we've said before, when Miki was asked where the jiba was, where the point of origin of the universe was, there's 2 levels of understanding of that. There's a sort of exoteric understanding. It's here, it's this point on the ground. And, there's a shamanistic understanding that the expansion of the universe, that everything's interconnected in the universe, and every single point in the universe is the origin of the universe throughout the universe. So she could have picked anywhere, couldn't she? So I think when she identified the jiba, it was kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek, somebody asked her, oh yeah, it's down there, that's my thoughts, She did seem to have a sense of humor in some of the stories about her. And so that kagura is very, very special. It's been hugely exotericized, but it's very, very special. Now, along with that, so that's one type of spirit dance from Miki's tradition. And that's a very fundamental, effectively, it's
What's
a
that
dance.
called again?
It's called just a kagura, Kagura. It means the divine music. So that's one type from Miki's tradition. Another type is a thing called the teodori. Now, teodori is rather different. It's done to songs, and it's the movements. The songs sort of embody esoteric. I wouldn't say shamanistic, but esoteric principles. The songs are about. And they're about esotericism, effectively, and the movements of the dance, or the teodori just means the hand movements, but it's not just the hands; it's the whole body that's moving. Every time you sing something in the song. you make movements that harmonize with the song, the thing that's being described in the song. The songs are like there are 12 songs altogether. It's a thing called the Mikagura Uta, but then there's another song which is called Yorazuo, which is separate from them. And each one of them has all these different movements, and they're sort of, in this day and age, they're all sort of ritualized and there's a set pattern. But early on in the history of Miki's tradition, there was a much more, I don't know how you'd put it, a more flavoursome variety of this kind of stuff that was going on. And the sound has also become very austere, the way that it's sung. So if I sing you a little bit of the Yorazu, it goes like this. It goes, Yorozu yono sekai ichiretsu mihara sedo mune no wakarita mono wa nai. That's like the first line of it. It sort of means looking all over the world and through all ages, there's nobody who's understood the underlying principle of nature. That's effectively what it's saying. And when you say wanai, that means there is no one. Mono wanai, there is no one. You wave your hands from side to side in a kind of negative gesture. When you're saying Yorazuyo, your hands move like they're moving over the surface of the ocean, looking all over the world, all around the world and through all ages. And so this is what I mean by the hand movements meshing up with the songs and the meaning. And in this day and age, the Teodori is done in a very set way, but by everyone, just about except me and a few others. But it can still be done in a very, very shamanic way, and it forms a significant part of my own spirit dance. Obviously, it's a tradition that I've been very deeply steeped in. It's my teacher's tradition. And it's another example of esotericism. Now, what's really interesting is we don't really know what Miki herself taught, because the timing was difficult. The timing, it was, she started teaching from 1838, and then we had the whole, Meiji Restoration in Japan, and we go through all this. Incidentally, the early episodes on heretics, for the Woven Energy listeners, the early episodes on heretics, about they're entitled The Origins of Jiu-Jitsu and Kempo, but actually they're also about the origins of modern Japan. So we probably mistitled them. We described this process, and then the shamanism of that time was a reaction to the turmoil that was going on in the country. And then you had this sort of democratic revolution within Japan, became a very, very Western-leaning culture. And then the samurai class, who'd been sort of deposed, started to try to come back, and it got jingoistic and militaristic, and they started clamping down on religion. And Miki's tradition went through that down clamping and it was actively sort of stilted at that point in time. And then after World War II, it sort of got released again. And there were there's a guy called Nakayama Shozen who did a lot of work to try and get it back to its origins, who did a lot of good work to get it back to its origins. But there's still a lot of exotericism in it,
Was he a heretic?
He was a very well thought of heretic. He was a heretic and a diplomat. That's probably the best way to put it. The diplomacy skills are very, very important. And Nakayama Shozen, this guy I've got a lot of time for. He's a very cool guy. He was actually one of the guys who got judo put in the Olympics as well. He was one of the main players in that, interestingly. And so I do enjoy singing those songs. I could just sit and sing that all day. Maybe for the patrons, I'll just sing the whole thing into the microphone. I don't know if anybody other than me would be interested. But the voice is. We did that episode on Hamilach, didn't we?
Is the singing voice to do with that then? To do with the
yeah, it can be. It can be. I mean, you can do spirit dance in complete silence, but you don't have to. And these things, all these shamanic exercises, they can all be mixed together. They can all be varied in different ways. You can have the drum and the voice, all that kind of stuff. It can all be mixed together, So there's a lot of that kind of thing going on. So
I was going to ask you about, I mean, it doesn't have to be for this episode, but I was going to ask you about the voice and Central Europe or East. There was some sort of can't remember off the top of my head. Was it Norwegian folk singing or something? And it's plainly shamanic. I'll have to do some digging. Find it, but it was very interesting stuff.
Yeah. So I've already I mentioned martial arts there, so I might as well just jump onto another quite well known one, which is Ram Moi, which is performed by Muay Thai fighters when they go into the ring. And its correct name, I'm not too sure on the pronunciation, it was Wai Kru Ram Moi, which is kind of a ritual in this day and age, but it's clearly animal spirit dance. And it's also sort of not just in Thailand, where Muay Thai comes from, it's also in Laos and Cambodia and various other places. And it's still spirit dance in that it's not a set ritual. So it hasn't become fully ritualized. It's not set. Different people do it in different ways. Some people do it quite simply. It's called Ram Moi. It's short for Wai Kru Ram Moi. Yeah. That would be, if you want to look that up, the spelling would be RAMUAY, 2 words. Yeah. And it's like, it's a preparation. As you might be aware, cockfighting is very popular in Thailand, and the human fighting of Muay Thai tends to parallel that. There's a lot of what I would call chicken. Xingyi, chicken's one of the 12 animals of Xingyi, and there's an awful lot of what would be cast as chicken in Xingyi in Muay Thai, to the extent that I often point people at Muay Thai videos if they want to improve their Xingyi chicken. Yeah. And the Y from the name Wai Kru Ram Moi is a kind of form of traditional greeting, Thai greeting, with the palms held together as a sign of kind of respect. And the word Kru is sort of the Thai form of the Sanskrit word, meaning kind of a guru or master. And it's in this day and age, it's done as a bit of ritual to show respect and gratitude to the boxer's teacher, but the character, the flavor of that extends into the actual fighting system. When Muay Thai is practically applied, that character, the flavor of that spirit dance is there in their technique, in their movement, in their strategy. And it's kind of like, it's obviously Buddhist influence, being Thai, but it is pretty shamanic. I mean, some of the people, again, it's the spectrum, but some of the people do it in a very shamanic way. But you can see the Buddhist influence, for instance. You can see, for instance, when they go into the ring, they bow their head at 3 times in each corner. It's sort of in a salutation to the Buddha. It's kind of like but it is very personal. Each boxer does it in a different way, and some of them do it in a very complex way, and some of them do it in a very simple way, and a few of them, and it tends to be the really good fighters, they do it in a really shamanic way, and this, again, it's not all of the fighters doing it. I'd say it's even like only 10% of them are doing it even in a very shamanic way. But from what I've seen, those 10% tend to be the guys who are really good fighters, really good kind of traditional Muay Thai fighters, And so there's another one that's quite well known. It's easy to find on YouTube because there's so much Muay Thai on YouTube, and Muay Boran, the older form.
I've got something here called Wai Kru Muay Thai dance, if that rings any bells.
That's the one. That's it. Yeah, that's
the one. Yeah, Wai Kru. WAIKRU.
Or KHRU. I don't think there's a standardized romanization. Yeah.
It's difficult with this stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's another example from the world of martial arts. And I mean, the issue with this stuff is it's in a way, it's all the same stuff, you know? But in kind of, you can see these sort of links between martial arts and shamanism the world over as well, you know? And as I've said many times, you can view martial arts as a shamanic technique in terms of most shamanism is about people coming together productively. But there are times when human beings end up in conflict. And that in itself you can learn from. Graham, my co-host on the Heretics podcast, he said he was talking about a time he got knocked unconscious with a judo throw. And he says one of his favorite sayings is you either win or you learn. And he says I did a lot of learning that day. Yeah. And this, and in a way, martial arts, you know, what we say is shamanic technique is something that puts you in a place where you have to learn from nature. Martial arts do that.
Well, martial arts can be similar to the lion cubs or the tiger cubs play fighting as they use their fellow tiger cub, which is part of nature, in order to learn from nature.
And you get feedback, and you can't be too delusional. Depending on, you know, how tight or loose the rules of your martial art are. And when there's some martial arts that the rules are so tight that you can get a bit delusional. And you know, there are martial arts, there have been a lot of martial arts that have not done practical, are not done against resisting opponents. And in those cases, you can get a bit delusional. But for most martial arts, that's not true. Most martial arts are doing against resisting opponents. And you are getting feedback from your partner, you know. And that is a shamanic technique in itself. And it's also a dance, you know, where we said whether the Ainu are doing that crane dance. The different practitioners are harmonizing with each other. They're not necessarily, or in the Kagura, they're not necessarily doing the same movement. Well, the same when we're fighting with Xingyi. If we've got two guys who are a decent standard with Xingyi and they're fighting, we're not doing the same movements with each other, but there's a tight integration, there's a tight harmony between what one person's doing and what the other person's doing. If there wasn't, we'd be getting smacked in the mouth and banged in the solar plexus all the time, wouldn't we? You know, so and this is what I've said before. You know, it's been a source of frustration, as you know, to a lot of my students, and not just my Xingyi students, but my Kempo students as well. All this quote unquote weird shamanism stuff that Damon's into, but it's just the same thing. It's not different. It's just the same thing. You know, it's all spirit dance to me. You know, all spirit dance. But it's a rather specialized type. It's not as broad as different types of spirit dance. And I think to end, we're getting on for the hour, so just to end this episode, I'll give you one more example of a very heavily exotericized spirit dance, which you might want to look up, which I find absolutely awesome. Which is a thing, and it also its very name tells you how much the miasma has got involved in this particular form of dance, and it's known as the Dance of the Devil, and it comes from Colombia. One of my best friends in the world is a Colombian, and they are amazing people. Come on, just amazing people. One of my favorite sayings from Colombia is that people don't stop dancing because they get old. They get old because they stop dancing. And, you know, there are people in Colombia who dance. My friend had a timer on their watch. And it would go off every 3 hours, and they were dancing. The timer on the watch was to make sure that they didn't go more than 3 hours in any day without dancing. And dance is heavily embedded in that culture. And there's so many dances from Colombia, it's not real. But this particular one, the Dance of the Devil, is a wonderful, smoky creole of just like everything that they've got. It sort of symbolizes flames, the dancing of flames. And they wear these incredible bright colors, oranges and reds and golds and all this kind of stuff. And they also carry flags sometimes when they're doing it. And it's just, it's
can't find anything under Dance of the Devil, Colombia.
Did you say you can't or you can? Yeah, it's all right. We'll put links in. We'll put links on Patreon. It originated within the Canquamo Indian territory within Colombia, and obviously it was originally a very shamanic dance, but with all of the smoky flavors of civilization that have moved into Colombia over the hundreds of years, it's just become this amazing smorgasbord or mix of different flavors. And it was practiced for a long time, hundreds of years, in a few communities on the Colombia's Caribbean coast. But Christianity has steeped itself in it as well. But it's usually performed as a sort of ritual on the summer solstice. We've been talking about the solstices on the 2 Mithraism episodes and their importance in esotericism on the Heretics podcast recently. And this has always been a key time. It's a time of transition. It's a time of change. Sorry. It was the equinoxes we were talking about, but the solstices are also these times of tradition, times of transit, times of transition, times of change. That's very ancient. That's very shamanistic, very esoteric, but it's also a Christian tradition. And it's also taking in the culture of the Black African slaves. So you've got the native South American shamanism. You've got the shamanism of the Africans who were brought over there against their will. And you've got this sort of slightly shamanic, Catholic, with dollops of Mithraism embedded within it. And all of these things have been put in a pot and mixed around. And out of this stuff has come this amazing Dance of the Devil, and not just that, it's also modern music is in there. There's the Latin dance stuff, obviously, which Colombia is big on. Things like salsa and other things like that. And then on top of that, you've got stuff like modern jazz music and all this kind of stuff. And it's almost like a Creole or like a jambalaya. It's like somebody's taken a pot and they've put all this stuff in and they've mixed it around. And it's very colourful and wonderful. And it actually is there to symbolise the character of an active volcano. And it's very, very energetic. So I thought that's a good one to finish on. Like I say, in Patreon notes, I'll put a bunch of stuff so people can look these things up. No problem. And I think that's. We could do this forever, couldn't we? We could do episode after episode after episode to spirit dance around the world. But what about maybe we do another one with an equal number on it before we
I do want to explore a few of the examples you've already given in the Woven Energy podcast as well. I remember you were talking about the sand people and there was a giraffe dance or something. There might be something to explore there.
Well, let's do that in the next one as well. Yeah.
Right, okay, so that's been fascinating. Thank you very much, Damon, for all that. And next episode we will do part 2 to this episode. And then what do you reckon we should move on to after that? Should we keep going with stage 3? And
yeah, we'll do what we can on audio. Like I say, we're all waiting for the groove, aren't we, in terms of actually doing it? But we'll do some technique. We'll do some. Why don't we have an attempt at describing some shamanic dance, spirit dance on audio? Let's have a go at it.
I'll have a go at the very, very basics.
Yeah. I think we've done a little bit on basics already.
Because like I said earlier in this episode, if you get into this stuff and you get through stage 1 and 2, there are certain experiences that you may have that might lead you to naturally just do these movements. And that will be something interesting to explore as well, to make sure that we all know we're on the right track.
Yeah, if you get heavily into a state of chillicity, stuff will start coming out. It just will, especially once stage 3 is all about getting the movement rich. It's not about getting in the movement in the first place. It tends to be what comes out if you're untrained in stage 3. It tends to be very simplistic movement. And as we've said, that's not the greatest radar for nature, but it's something, right? It's something. Yeah. So yeah. So we'll start addressing that kind of stuff.
Cracking. So, guys, thank you ever so much for listening. You can head to wovenenergy.com/start-here for our exclusive Get Started episode. You can also head to patreon.com/wovenenergy and sign up or donate as little as $1 a month to help us out here, and you'll get, you can see on the Patreon page the benefits that you'll get for that. So thank you ever so much, Damon, and we will see you in the next episode.
Thanks a lot, mate.